where you are joining us from, your organization, and any fun facts that is necessary for our call today. So we will do that in the next few minutes while we allow for others to join. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Thank you. Thanks for joining, Gerald, and thanks for joining, Guillem. I also see Ziadi. We talked a bit in the course of the year. I see Andrew joining us, so thank you for joining. I see Kathy, I see Sanjay, I see Tino Tenda, I see Amy, I see Barbara. Thank you all for joining today. Please keep the intros coming. In 2, we start with our first talk for today. I mentioned earlier that please check the name displayed, as it could display the wrong name because of a technical issue we had. So you could edit it and then use your preferred name plus your organization if you prefer. I see Costas, I see Kwabena from Ghana as well. I see Lars. Thank you for joining again, Lars. Thank you, amazing. Okay, so I believe we could start now. So throughout the year, the Five City Foundation, together with the African Makerspace Network, as part of the African European Maker Innovation Ecosystem Project, acted as facilitators and interviewed and engaged some stakeholders within the Maker innovation ecosystems in Africa and in Europe. And those activities led to having this community call to create a platform that further connects us and establish more collaborations between the two regions. And so on the basis of this, we are having these sessions, and it's going to be splitted into 2 main parts. In the first part, we are going to be hearing from 3 amazing speakers from Europe and Africa. They would be speaking around innovation and policy, using their perspective and their experiences in the ecosystems as well. Then we will dive into a more interactive session where we would share some research findings from our activities throughout the year, and also take feedback in areas where we align or in other perspectives that you would want to add to this conversation as well. So on this note, I'd like to acknowledge our speakers for joining us today. Your acceptance to share your insights today is very significant, and I believe you're going to learn a lot from your experiences and the perspectives that you bring to this discussion. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Guillem, the Executive Director of the Fab Lab Barcelona, to give us his talk. Guillem, please, if you can hear me, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, for having me here today. It's a pleasure to present and to get connected more closely with the African Makerspace Network. We're also members of the MaKe project. And for us, it's very interesting that we have these conversations, in particular because I think, especially in Europe, we all see that we are at the moment of maturity, which doesn't mean of greatness, but of maturity of the makeup movement. So it's very good time to start confronting our practices to things that are happening abroad, and to actually see how these cross-learning approaches happen. I could actually present today the work that we do at the lab, but I was asked to kind of talk more about the state of the art, a bit of how I see Fab Labs and maker spaces, and I decided to frame the presentation of today from the concept of intelligence, and in particular, let's say maker spaces as spaces for knowledge sovereignty, which I think it's a very relevant topic nowadays. In particular, right, because we are living a moment where in one side, knowledge has been very niche into very specific areas of knowledge, as well as into very specific practices, such as academic knowledge. And at the same time, we are seeing the emergence of all these kind of big, large language models, right, that they extract information, let's say, and put them broadly in the hands of everyone, we could say, but as well in control of very few who control the way these large language models happen. So I wanted today to talk about the idea I think that you all here in a way or another it would resonate to you, which is that I do think that making and makers, they generate not only objects and prototypes and solutions, but more importantly, they generate intelligence. So, you know, I'm Guillem Camprodon. I come from FabLab Barcelona. I'm the executive director there. FabLab Barcelona is located inside the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. It started in the year 2007, was actually one of the first maker spaces to start in Europe. And we, over the years, we've been navigating what it means to be kind of a foundational maker space. So to go from, you know, being unique just because you have a 3D printer to actually having to think further what's the value of Fab Labs, of maker spaces in society, and actually what's the impact they produce. So at the moment, I'll say that most of the work we do, it's more oriented toward research from the point of view of how we facilitate the creation of methodologies and tools that the Fab Lab and the maker spaces and network all over the world would then localize and implement, as well as a lot of knowledge transfer locally here in Barcelona through local education programs, but as well as broadly through distributed programs and through, let's say, the releasing of open knowledge materials. As I said, we are more than 50 years on that. So for the good and the bad, you know, we've been going through that. So for me, the most important point nowadays is that if you look at the map of maker spaces, at least of Fab Labs, you know, that this could, of course, be diversified to Fab Labs, maker spaces, hacker spaces. Even maybe someone will say food labs should be here and bio labs and wet labs. I think what's clear is that the network is there. And what's important right now is how we impact through that network. And so I would say that over the years, what I found out is that more than actually being experts on digital fabrication, these networks, these laboratories, what they are experts is in actually complex distributed knowledge management. Because at the end of the day, I think that Fab Labs, maker spaces, they are knowledge transfer machines and knowledge machine makers. So I would like to introduce with the concept of what I say, situated intelligence. So something very relevant to me of what our networks are capable to do is that we go from these planetary issues that are very hard actually to tackle from an individual point of view, from a collective point of view, I will say it even, and we are capable to bring them to the local scale of a product or an intervention to then over time, right, see the impact they have. So I would say that that's what makes our spaces fundamentally unique. And I would say that this is not also something that defines Fab Lab, is actually this diversity of spaces that that we are creating, that in a way or another are transcending the definition of a space that give access to tools and are becoming mostly in a space that give access to knowledge, or more importantly, in a space where knowledge is created at the small local scale that then over the time could scale broadly. And I think we could see that, especially, let's say I see it here in Barcelona, in Europe, 3D printers now, you know, cost 2 orders or 3 orders of magnitude less than when I started here. So the idea for us anymore is not how we give access to a 3D printer. It is actually how we generate the safe spaces for people to come down to this small level to actually generate personal solutions, collective solutions at the community level that they, you know, they impact at the planet scale. I would like maybe to underline that when I say personal, and I will use this a lot, I don't think personal as individual. For me personally, it's from the point of view of personal computing. So from the point of view of something that's not industrial, something that actually it happens at this grassroots scale, to say. And I think the concept of situated intelligence is also very much connected to the idea of whole communities. They are capable to generate their own resources. And this, I think, I mean, it's obvious we could all see it with COVID, right? I mean, the industry, of course, knew much better how to do a mask and how to produce them, and also the protective equipment. But actually, it was this grassroots knowledge that was in all this network, the one that at the end of the day was the one giving the first solution to these problems. So something very important also from this concept of situated intelligence is that a lot of the problems that we are trying to solve, a lot of these things that we are facing as a community, as society, and we are trying to solve, actually they cannot be solved from the traditional perspective of solutionism, because they are what we could say wicked problems. So the role of a makerspace in many cases to facilitate the creation of artifacts that helps us to mediate this process. So I like a lot to think that, in many ways, the prototypes that we develop in makerspaces are not the solution itself, are just part of the process of debate, the part of the process of bringing people together that's needed to find consensus, to then decide if what we need, it's another machine, it's another technology, or maybe it's the opposite. We just need to get rid of one specific technology, or we just need, to agree into something as simple as saying yes or no. What you're seeing here right now, for example, are images from projects we did at Fab Barcelona, where local community work in building devices to measure the environment as a way to gather people collectively into one point to start discussing an issue. So those things were never the solution to the problem. We're only a way to bring people together into something. For me, also, second concept, which is very fundamental in what makerspaces can do or are doing already, it's the concept of appropriating intelligence. And this, I think, it's fundamental in the way that knowledge is presented nowadays, right? We live in a world where actually it looks like there's just a few people which are the ones which are entitled to create knowledge, the ones that are in academia, the ones that have the power to develop something like ChatGPT. But in my opinion, everyone should be entitled to create knowledge. And it's through that processes of appropriating intelligence. What you're seeing here, for example, are low-tech sensing solutions we make in the lab. And these are like all people, that they've been suffering specific environmental problems for many years, that they suddenly, got entitled to use and operate those devices, and even to make them on their own. So the idea that citizens are able not only to make, but to generate knowledge, and not only to generate knowledge from the point of view of, learning, but as well as, for example, creating data. Those are sensing devices, you are entitled to create data through them. So I think that's also, to me, fundamental to understand, let's say, what it means making us generating intelligence. It's fundamental to the idea, the effect this has also, and the importance that makerspaces have in raising the self-esteem of people. Over the years, I saw a lot of people that they thought they could not learn. They thought actually that the schools were not for them, that, institutions were not for them, that university was not something accessible to them. And it was part of this process that we all facilitate, the ones here, that they finally succeed to actually understand that it was actually about the context they were framing, that they had truly the potential to generate knowledge, and they had truly the potential to learn. And so I think these appropriating intelligence concept is fundamental to understand our role or value or where we are heading to. I think this also has a very important point of view from how we are capable to situate intelligence from the point of view of getting things that happen in the maker spaces and bringing them outside. So nowadays at the lab, if you ask me the amount of work that we do, I would say that 80% is outside. So more and more, it's not that people comes here to use our machines, it's actually that we go outside or we facilitate process through training of trainers, through engaging with communities that happens outside the lab. So I think that's also fundamental. the boundaries of the makerspace, maybe originally and the concept of the makerspace were very limited, but I would say nowadays they actually they are getting removed. They're being removed, and actually they're opening further. And I think that's fundamental, because the equipment is not anymore the thing that makes makerspaces unique. It's actually the knowledge, again, that they are capable to make and to build or to infrastructure communities with it. This to me also connects a lot with the idea that I would describe as emerging intelligence. And to me, it's how once we support communities, then communities alone are starting to build their own systems, to build things, you know, that no one thought about. This here, for example, it's the Remix del Barrio project, where actually citizens from Barcelona started to work with the concept of recycling organic materials using biomaterial recipes. And it's a process that now has a scale to a lot of schools in the city. And to me, what's very relevant to that is this concept of first person. So suddenly when someone puts himself to confront a local issue and gets, you know, these tools, these methodologies that have been developed in makerspaces, this helps them actually to use those into contexts that we never think before that those could be used. So, you know, when we started to work in biomaterials, I would never expect that biomaterials would be something that's actually used in schools as a practice to understand the local context, because these kids are making biomaterials by looking at their existing material flows that happen within their neighborhoods, collecting these materials, looking at recipes and academic publications in how to transform it into new materials, and finally, you know, trying to solve solutions with this. So understanding material flows, you know, by appropriating, we could say something that was not originally, you know, meant for that. But I'll say also something very important to me. It's how this facilitates the integration of technology deeply to communities. So what we could say as digital literacy. You know, this is a project, for example, here in Barcelona, that we've been working on putting sensors on sailing boats. So sailors actually, as they sail, they collect data about the water quality or the water pollution on the harbor. So seeing actually these sailors, you know, learn about these very advanced, let's say, sensing solutions, but not only learning, so appropriating themselves. You know, it's not us who tell them to do so, we're them the ones who started to do that. So to me, it's also fundamental. So the idea of how we not only, let's say, create intelligence inside the makerspace, but we facilitate others to create it on their own. This here, it's the case of Roberto Bros from the Master on Design of Emergent Futures, a program that we do here at YAC. And to me, what's very interesting is this case of how this emerging intelligence is building these hybrid profiles. MaKe is someone now who's starting to build surfboards out of mycelium. So how do you coin that? Is he a designer of surfboards? Is he a farmer of surfboards? Is he, you know, a gardener of surfboards? So I think it's also very interesting how these processes that we facilitate are basically creating connections between profiles and creating these new hybrid profiles. So the capacity that we have as makerspaces to create hybrid profiles, hybrid jobs, let's say, that they don't exist before. And finally, to me, it's also very fundamental, the concept of how we create platforms and tools for common intelligence. When we started make the Fab Lab movement, I remember that the Fab Lab movement was very exclusive. It was a bit like, well, yes, we do digital fabrication at our own. And more importantly, you know, we do digital fabrication. We don't care about other crafters. We don't care about the existing industries which are around the city. And I think luckily we actually over the years learned that that was a very dumb decision. What you see here, for example, is Makework is an initiative that started in Glasgow, and now we manage through Fab Lab Barcelona, which it brings together maps of local manufacturers. From the idea, I would say that the role of the makerspace is not anymore the one to facilitate only access to equipment, but is the one to facilitate and organize all these networks that they exist locally of local manufacturers, either if they are very grassroots and using very ancient technologies or very advanced technologies. I would say here is also very fundamental where the concept of Fab City Hub emerged, which is this idea of not only creating networks of Fab Labs as the facilitators of equipment, but also these spaces where all the productive stakeholders of a city could meet together. But again, something very interesting too, it's how now, let's say, where this movement as the maker movement starts to be mature, we start to build our own tools for sharing all this knowledge. If you think, for example, the Fab Academy program now, it's been more than 15 years with more than, let's say, 100 students every year, each of them filling repositories of data with tutorials in how they actually work, how they use the machines, what projects they were building, what were their interests, what were their failures. So right now, for example, through this distributed design platform we lead, we are building this distributed design learning hub, trying to actually classify all that knowledge. And on top of that, even using advanced large language models to actually be able to index that information and even, to detect things like, for example, what's the thing that people fails the most in a particular activity, and especially being able to end up in how we organize this knowledge. So each of you would pick a specific, let's say, learning path or things that you like to learn based on what you already know, where you want to go, and all this information that has been created collectively over the years, could be accessible to you in different ways rather than just, looking at the page, in this case of each student, for example. But not only that, the idea of how we actually together we build platforms that serve the purpose of many maker spaces, I think it's fundamental to the idea of why we are a network, And so this idea of common intelligence, where you think on tools like FabLabs.io, for example, that maybe you might know because you have your lab register there, or as well as, for example, a smart citizen, the idea that instead of relying in technology that are developed by big corporations to collect data from our sensors, environmental data, smart city data, we start to build our own tools that we could share. I think that's fundamental. And these are things that are happening. This platform you see here, it's more than 10 years old, that show our capacity collectively, or what I will say, it's common intelligence. So at the end of the day, I hope that this presentation helped a bit to inspire us that we are truly makers of intelligence. And I think that's fundamental in the way we explain what we do. We do facilitate access to equipment. We do create safe spaces for people to make. And at the end of the day, this supports the creation of intelligence. This supports a model of creating intelligence, which is different than the standard one that has been promoted by the, let's say, the academia, in the Western vision of how, let's say, knowledge and the Industrial Revolution shaped the way that we build knowledge, and as well as in the way that it might be shaped in the future if we kind of continue, with these artificial intelligence and large language models defining how knowledge is created. So if you have interest, in digging a bit more in some of the examples that we do, because I know I haven't actually touched that much into specific projects that we do, I recommend you to check the FabLab Barcelona website. We have these 7 areas of impact, let's say, where we have the projects organized through that. And at the end of the day, I also wanted to share you a bit, how we are actually in detail, in a way, supporting internally what's our strategy, to create these making us intelligence flows, to say, And for us, what's fundamental is this concept in how we're actually able to go from very express methodologies to very immersive ones. And more importantly, how we are actually guiding our communities, guiding the people we work with to not only follow what we do, but to adopt it as a way to then adapt it, as a way to then apply it into their local context. And this could happen in a learning experience in a very informal context, or in a very formal context like the academia, as well as, going further to research, incubation, etc. Well, maybe it's too much of a broad picture, but I just wanted to share it because I think at least it helps me a lot to structure a bit some of the things that we do. So I hope that you like that. I'm very happy, to answer specific questions. Talking about what we do, it's always hard. Because we all have, I think, a lot of opinions and at the same time a lot of things to say. But I hope that this talk inspires you a bit, and it helps us navigate a bit the present and in particular the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful presentation and sharing these projects and approaches that you've used over the years. I believe the basis for knowledge exchange is essential for how we think and how we innovate. So I would ask that if anyone has specific questions or submissions and would want to ask, okay.
I don't know if it's a really specific question, but I wanted to say thank you and that I really found it very inspiring. I thought you had such a great way of framing and phrasing many of the concepts that a lot of the people in this room were working on and thinking about. So it was really valuable the way that you just put it on point. And of course, there's just a lot of, I guess, meta level or larger questions around this. It always feels like looking in from the outside, like you in Barcelona and with IAC have had such great success of also convincing at least city level policymakers of the importance of these kind of approaches, you know, because obviously, and I think we all agree in this room, this is so essential for the larger challenges society has to solve. And yet in our very capital efficiency driven world, this way of appropriating intelligence, of explorative learning, of prototyping, as you discussed, seems so frivolous to many who have not understood the importance of these concepts. So this is why I don't have a really concrete question, but I'm always wondering, like, what can we learn in cities where policymakers are not so on board, and other environments for how to popularize these concepts and approaches and get more support for that kind of work in. So, but thank you very much. It was a really great talk.
Thank you, Darren, for your submission. Ziadi, I don't know if Guillem, you'd want to respond to that.
Sure. Do you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Ziadi, please, could you hold on a bit? I want to make sure if Guillem would want to respond to
If
Geraldine.
you want, I could reply after Ziadi. You know, I could just
okay,
take
sure.
the two of them. Yeah,
Sure,
thank you.
sure. Okay. Ziadi, please, over to you.
Cool. Thank you guys for just sharing what you guys do from the Barcelona. Actually, Fab Barcelona is one of my favorites makerspaces. I know that has doing a great project. And for me, after your presentation, I would like to ask you, how do you guys sustain your knowledge transfer? I would like to ask in terms of who sponsor you, because on my religion at Sub-Sahara, it's local community, they are not willing to pay for gaining knowledge or workshops, which is hard. And it can be hard to the makers to transfer that knowledge because of lack of material, or those are the main challenge we're always facing. I would like to hear from you. How do you guys sustain your transfer? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ziadi. So, well, I would say that we are very privileged on that, because YAC is a fully private institution, so we don't have any direct public investment. But over the years, we have been able to consolidate ourselves in three main lines. One is through the competitive research funding, in particular from the European Union, very much connected to the topic of developing methodologies that then the networks like the Makerspaces networks, but as well as other institutions could build on top. So these, in a way, the advice I could give here is that it's very important that Makerspaces, they position themselves not only as the access they could offer to the tools, but as well as to that knowledge, again, that they have in how to do things that for you might be very easy, but for people are very hard to do. Like, for example, managing complex communities, dealing with open knowledge, appropriating technologies that are done by very big companies and bringing them to the scale of a town. All these things are things that you know, but sometimes we don't think that we know, and are key that we are capable to deliver them as research to governments, to companies, etc. The second thing that we do a lot is education. As you know, YAC is an education institution where we are based, so we have education programs, the Master on Design for Emerging Futures, the FAB Academy, the Fabric Academy, the Master on Design for Distributed Innovation that supports also us. And finally, also, are we connected to the first topic? We do work a lot with companies, right? where either we sell them products that we build, tangible ones, or services. And that's important also. So over the years, instead of just from what we do customized work for others, for institutions like governments, companies, universities, we've been trying to make products in a way, So from the research that we do, try to assemble a platform or something that we could sell. I would say in the context of Barcelona, we have been also very privileged that this role of giving access to citizens was taken by the government. So there's a public network of Fab Labs called the network of Ateneus de Fabricación, right? And at the same time, there starts to be quite a mature network of private maker spaces that give access mostly to professionals. But what maybe the answer to your question from the point of view of if the community is not willing to pay, what do I do? To me would be that you position a lot from the point of view of not the community, but how you support the infrastructure of the community. So you go to see you are capable to bring things to the community that no one else could bring. And you're capable to bring things to your local community that governments are interested that they happen. Go to governments, go to private funds and tell them you are capable to deliver that directly or in cascade through training of trainers, through open knowledge platforms, and get funding from that. And then, the citizen would come, but would come as part of these programs, not at an individual level. I would say that is a way, to sustain. I would say these are a way to sustain growth at the same time that of course you start, and I think that's a very unique from Makerspaces, to ensure that you still have these very unique profiles that come at a very personal level, because are also the ones that they usually become even part of the staff now and help our Makerspaces to run and to shine in a way. Connecting a bit very quickly to what Geraldine, what you said, I would say the most important thing I think we have to do is to explain better what do we do. Because I think governments still see us very much as providers of equipment and infrastructure. And I think what's very important is we start to reframe that. And what's very clear is that we have very big knowledge gap in society. We have a lot of people that actually would need to change jobs soon. We have a lot of youth unemployment in some countries. For example, here, in Spain, like unemployment of young people is very high. We also know the standard academic systems are also very expensive. So if we are capable to actually shape a bit, the way that we are perceived, I think that's fundamental for policymakers to understand what could be truly your impact.
That's super insightful. Thank you for sharing, Guillem. Because of time, I think we should move on to our next speaker, Ahmadou from the Airbus Africa community. Ahmadou, if you can hear me, please, over to you.
Thank you. So I will share my screen. Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Ahmadou Diallo. I am working at Airbus in Toulouse, in the south of France. I'm from Senegal, West Africa, and I'm living in France. So I will take this short 20 minutes that I have here to present to you a project from a friend of mine who is called Hugues Aubin, who cannot be here today. And I will present to you what is called the Forge of Adaptation. And I think it will really resonate with a lot of things that we have said before, Guillem, about how to create intelligence knowledge, how can it be distributed, and also to say, okay, how can, let's say, Fab Labs be less like shells where everything is contained and be more like synapses where really it's more about the flow of information. So before I start out, maybe to just ask a question, I just want you in your head to imagine a superhero, like, and just to try to imagine what is the superhero that you can see in your head. Is it Superman? I don't know, Iron Man, Wonder Woman, whoever. Just imagine it and keep it there in your head. And then after, once I go to the next slide, I will see. So this guy, I will let me draw. So this guy here is Prosper, and this is one of the the initiative, the project that was run with the Forge CC. So Forge CC, I did not talk about it, sorry. It's Forge of adaptation from south to north, making learning and sharing solution to tackle the effect of climate change. Okay, so Prosper is I will not say a handicapped guy or a person with disabilities. I will say he is a person with different abilities. And Prosper, he has a wheelchair, and in this one of the projects that we run in Forge CC, basically this initiative here is to say, okay, it's called in tuning my handbike, but basically it's to say, okay, he's always going around the city, he has his wheelchair. What if we can use his wheelchair in order to put some let's say some sensors in his wheelchair which are solar let's say powered, and then have those sensors, sorry, can let's say measure the air pollution in the city, and then after the weather, all of that. So this is really what Prosper has let's say agreed to do with his wheelchair. And this is one of the many workshops that was done through the Forge CC initiative that I will present to you today. So for me, Prosper is a superhero. He's not the kind of superhero you can see in a Marvel or a DC movie, but he's like the real superhero. Then I will just share with you what is the mission statement of Forge CC. So it is together we want to really to adapt, to innovate and share solutions to overcome climate change and other crises, which were inspired by COVID-19 response. So Forge CC was born after the COVID-19 crisis and is part of many initiatives that was launched, and I will share with you more what are our objectives. So really, our objective is to have a global presence and local empowerment. We call it GLOCAL, like a combination of global and local. And as said by Guillem before, it's really to harness the digital common to really have open source designs and everything that is done to make local manufacturing for local innovation, meaning how we can really empower local communities. And we're talking about earlier, Guillem, about the Fab Labs not just being like where you come and do prototypes, but where really you build the knowledge. And this is also one of our pillars, is say how we can be a synapse, knowledge diffusion. So this is really very important to us. And then after, if we say, okay, Fab Labs and Makerspace as innovation hubs, because it's important that we just are not seen as, let's say, prototyping, all of that, but innovation. I think Guillem was answering the question. I think the question that you are trying to answer it is, what is your value proposition? Because only then, when you have identified your value proposition, that you can go see some institution or some local private companies and say, okay, this is what a Fab Lab can do. This is my value proposition. And also our last, let's say, pillar in our strategy in the Forge CC strategy is to talk about cultural diversity and inclusive participation, because when we are doing all those workshops, it's really inclusive in many countries. I will share with you what we are doing, what we have done so far, and what we want to do today. Okay, so our core pillars, as you know, most of you, there is what we call the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And really what we want to do is to say, okay, today we have the issue of climate change, we have the SDGs, and how can we, as the Fab Labs, as let's say network of Fab Labs, how can we really tackle those climate changes, and using a common understandable framework that is shared with many people. So we say, okay, let's try to have some workshops locally done in many local Fab Labs in many different countries from the north and the south, and to be able to say, okay, each workshop we will let's say tackle 1 or 2 or 3 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And once we have identified those projects, we want to document them. Either there are existing projects that we can replicate and document them, our process, because we are talking about knowledge management, knowledge transfer earlier. So basically, we will document everything that we are doing. Either it is a new thing that we will do, a new workshop, it is an existing workshop that then after we can do again and then document it, and then after we will share it after. Today, the ForgeFi activity is mainly focused on the French-speaking Fab Labs. I have, I think, in the virtual room, Ahmadou from Sen Fab Lab in Dakar, Senegal. So hi, Modou. So this is really to connect those Fab Labs, and all the workshop that we did in the ForgeFi was in part of the French network of Fab Labs in France, and also the West African Fab Labs in West Africa. And the aim is really also to say in the fourth pillar how we can disseminate those methods and possibilities and to make them usable outside of the Fab Labs. We are talking here also about knowledge diffusion. And the fifth one, okay, how can we accompany some groups in educational institution, association, companies, collectives? So it's all about what is our value proposition as a Fab Lab, or concept of tackling climate change, and how can we bring that value to companies, private or public, or collectivities or institutions, because we will invite them to come and do, let's say, for free, some workshops in some Fab Labs. It's also a way to make them discover those spaces. And finally, it is to bring cities and Fab Labs close together. This is very important because we don't want, I think you are talking about the fact that Fab Labs can feel isolated from the local institution, government, all of that. So really, it's how we can bring those together, having a common framework, which are the SDGs, so that they can also be, Fab Labs can be spaces for open cooperative prototyping based on digital commons and a support network. The ForgeFi basically is to say, okay, we will launch a number of workshops in different countries in some Fab Labs that are part of a network. It can be the French network of Fab Labs or the West African network of Fab Labs. So I will describe to you very easy, quickly the process. So each workshop, this is how it works. We have, let's say, a budget, an allocation of budget. So the workshop organization is 630 euros per day, and we are providing a material envelope of 500 euros per workshop. And the workshop can be either 1 day or 2 days. So how it works is basically we have a platform where Fab Labs can apply to say, okay, for example, I want to run a workshop. For example, we talk about postpay. I have a wheelchair and I want to install a solar-powered climate sensor to measure air pollution everywhere in the city. So they apply to our platform, and there is a screening which is done. And if the project is validated, then after we provide the funding, and then people from the community, local people, the public can participate for free. And while they are performing their workshop, they are also documenting it at the same time, because it is really important that we capture the knowledge as they do it. And we are talking about also local empowerment. And then once they have performed the workshop and documented it, then after ForgeFi will formalize the documentation, pay the Fab Lab for the activity they have performed, and then after, all those resources are on our website and they are free to use by anyone. Sorry, I'm not used to this mouse. So this is just to give you an overview, and then after, if you have the presentation, you will have all the links of different workshops that we have done. It is in French, building solar panels, doing some kind of hydrophone. And you can see that here, I think we are talking about the South-North collaboration. You can see that we have done many workshops in Sub-Saharan West Africa and also in France. So it's not just North or South. It's really, we are trying to say, okay, we have the SDGs and how can we all together tackle those issues. So what have we done so far? So we have launched 2 waves of codes for project. Then after we have been able to run 33 workshops in 11 countries. We have around 1,000 participants. And now we have 100 more candidates for a workshop in 12 countries. And what we have documented so far is 400 pages of pedagogical guides, which are on the FIFI by SA license, so free to use. And we have also 500 pages of documentation, because all those workshops, while they are doing it, they are taking pictures, they are they are documenting all the material needed, all of that, and all of that is recorded. So we have done 2 waves and we want to do more. So that's why also we are here today to share with you what we have done and to say that there is a value proposition because it's something that has been tested and we want to do more and we want to share this with the community here to see if there is, let's say, some synergies to be found or some support to be found to have more funding because we want to do more. So what can you do for us if as part of this community? So we want to do this, the project that we did for the last 3 years, we want to do, let's say, a new wave of 3 years. I will not go through all the details of the figures that you have here, but basically want to launch it in 3 years. And we are looking for some funding for this project. We want to basically to run a 3-year project with 306,000 people impacted with a budget of roughly 323 kilo euros if we target to do the project in 3 years, and we target to do 3,000 pages of open source documentation. So this is really what we want to do. This is why we are here today, to be able to share with you this ForgeCC project. Then after, how can we work together with you guys? Your network, we are talking about expanding the reach of open source solution beyond, let's say, language barriers, because today our ForgeCC initiative is mainly done in French-speaking countries, but why not expand it in English-speaking countries or other countries, etc. We are really open to this kind of collaboration, global collaboration. We want to encourage innovation, as you do. We want to democratize maker methodology, because only by doing can we show our value proposition. Only by doing can we show that we have an impact in our local communities and our private companies. Only by doing we can say, okay, we have an issue of climate change. How can we tackle it? We really need people working locally to be able to have this kind of impact. We want also to with you maybe to reimagine the role of knowledge as a collaborative force. I think Guillem talked about it earlier. Maybe to transform the Fab Lab city concept into reality by establishing a network of interconnected Fab Lab villages. This is something that you are already doing from my understanding, but why not do it together with a project which already have shown, let's say, our impact. So I will show you very quickly a video of, let's say, the summary, not all the project, but the main project. It's only 3 minutes, then after I will finish. Let me know if you have the sound.
No, we can't hear.
Ah. Okay, it's not that's okay, it's just the music in the background, so maybe the picture will speak for themselves, even if you don't have the sound. Thank you for the feedback. So just to finish, so you can see before going on that we have done diverse projects, and all those projects have been documented, stored in our website, and people can go there, use them for free, all of that. And it's really like tackling local climate change issues, which are sourced locally with really local solutions that are really adapted to the local communities. So I will finish with the quote because I like quotes, and this one from Denzel Washington is really resonate with me. Don't aspire to make a living, aspire to make a difference. And that's all for me. If you have some questions for me or more clarification, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmadou. So I think we can take a question or two, but in the chats, I think people would want to connect with you to explore possible collaboration. So it will be good if you could share your emails or some way that
Yes.
people could reach out to you.
Thank you. I will share in the chat, yes.
Okay. Please, do we have any questions from us or a contribution to what was shared by Ahmadou, sorry. If not, I think we could go to our final speaker, Yao, from the Center for Social Innovation in Ghana, to share his experience working in the innovation ecosystems with local people and also with international participants. So if Yao, you can hear me, please take over. Hello. Okay, because of time, I would prompt Yao to give his session, but we could move on quickly to Joseph from the Africa Makerspace Network to share a few findings from our interactions with stakeholders from Africa and then Europe. And this session is going to be interactive, so please feel free to bring in your thoughts and then your perspectives on how we could together formulate policies to promote the work that we do as makers. So Joseph, if you can hear me, over to you.
Thank you, Freda. So, please, I hope my screen can be seen.
Yes, Joseph, your screen can be seen.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So now to the point of where we are gathered here is to be able to share with you some of the relevant information we've been able to gather concerning the common policy agenda between Africa and Europe or Makerspaces. And the session, we've been able to hold 18 sessions so far. And out of these 18 sessions, we've had gathering. We've also had focus group discussions and also personal interviews. So basically, when we talk about the common policy agenda, I believe most of us here were part of the focus group discussion and also personal interviews. But at the same time, I believe there's a need for us to give a little bit about why we need the common policy for both Africa and Europe when it comes to Makerspace. And the notion is that we need to be able to have a common idea or common agenda and focus to be able to go ahead and be able to attain what is necessary for Makerspaces in Africa, especially when it comes to area of innovation, area of research, area of education and human development. So be able to do that and challenge and be able to be seen and recognized by policymakers. We need to have a policy for ourselves as Makerspaces so that we can go ahead and be able to make a very good, formidable contribution to the community in which we serve. So because of that, it brought us to be able to gather information from participants concerning how our participants basically are the stakeholders of makerspaces, that is makers, investors of makerspaces, CEOs of makerspaces, managers, and other individuals like educators who are also involved in makerspaces, or even students who are also involved in makerspaces. So they need to gather all sorts of information about makerspaces and how we can make it more sustainable and more formidable in ensuring that there is growth and sustainability, not just within the makerspace ecosystem, but also within the community in which they serve. So as I said earlier on, we've been able to hold about 18 sessions, and these sessions include focus group discussions. There's also include gatherings and personal interviews. And we've had so far 69 stakeholders. And among the 69 stakeholders, 26 of them are from Africa stakeholders who are into makerspace, and 43 are European stakeholders. So basically, you have 62% being from Europe and approximately 38% being from Africa. Now, these are some of the key identification or key things we've been able to identify from our interaction. And one thing I would like us to notice that the analysis or gathering these data, we use content information gathered from participants and inductive analysis to be able to get the information we have today. So each bar chart identifies the number of times a particular item, in this case, barriers, has been discussed by the participants. And it could be recognized from the slide that among all these, limited funding seems to be a challenge for makerspace. At the same time, issue relating to lack of inclusivity and diversity is also a challenge, as well as lack of recognition of makerspaces and Fab Labs. So I'd like to include Fab Labs because there are situations where we had Fab Labs also as part of our discussion. And issues relating to infrastructure, inaccessibility of makerspaces, high cost of equipment, high taxation, and lack of local problem solvers, that we lack that ability of people to be able to use the makerspace within their community to solve challenging problems within the community. We also had issues relating to infrastructure challenges, lack of common direction among all makerspaces, supply chain challenges, and challenges in sustaining makerspaces because this one's directed to limited funding. So all these are some of the barriers that were identified. And in our course, there was also the need to identify some enablers, some key areas or some key substance that is actually enabling makerspaces in Africa and Europe to still continue to function. And some of these, we were able to identify that even though there might be some limited funding, there are situations where there is the availability of external donors to support makerspaces, especially in Africa. Now, rent-free spaces, we realized that among all the makerspaces that we're able to engage, or stakeholders were able to engage, some parts of Europe or some makerspaces in Europe are able to get free rent because they are giving access to public structures to be able to use as their space to function and reduce the cost of their input or production process. Now, there is also the public funding, which is very common in European countries, which were mentioned by some of the participants we engaged. Also, collaboration with educational institutions is something that is now being hyped and now being seen almost across Africa and Europe. And government initiatives like innovation hubs is also recognized to be very common in Europe. In addition, there was also the enabler of institutionalizing makerspaces that in certain parts of Europe, now they are trying to ensure that makerspaces are being institutionalized so that people will get to recognize it, appreciate how important it is within solving problems or being an innovative tool in community-based approach. And finally, there was also open source information as also an enabler where now it is so easy. I remember just about this particular discussion or session, one of our partners put down a link for us to follow, which is also a form of open source information. And it is very key and it is helping makerspaces to function very well. Now, moving on to the main theme for the entire session is the makerspace policy recommendations that we were able to solicit from our participants. Now, putting them into categories, the first one is the government initiatives. And please, if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, you can also bring it on board. We can add those to what we've gathered so far. So the government initiative is one of the categories. And for the government initiative, it was recognized that initiatives that foster innovation and ensure fair participation of makerspaces in the global market should be institutionalized or should be put in place, because it was recognized as, or it was found that makerspaces are not given fair contribution or fair participation when it comes to contributing to the global market. Also, health, safety, and designation. That is policy on health, safety within the maker community is also very important. And there is no regulations as we speak on such matter. So it was important for us to also have a policy on health safety within the community of Makerspace. And policy supporting Makerspace designation as critical infrastructure. So there are instances where Makerspace can be able to manufacture or can be able to build up certain tools and equipment that can help the health sector, or during pandemics can also help the community. And it was recognized that if there is a policy that can recommend that Makerspace should be given that opportunity to do such activity or be a platform to be able to engage in such activity, it will also be very helpful for Makerspace. Also, recognition and integration. That is recognizing that Makerspace as local manufacturers and contributors to industrialization. So even though Makerspaces are within, I'm taking this quote from one of our participants saying that Makerspaces are not really seen as manufacturers, but rather as arts. So this, in this situation, is by through policies, through initiatives, can be seen as or can be recognized as local manufacturers rather than just arts, and also can contribute to the industrialization within our community and the globe as a whole. Then school curriculum integration, that is either STEM education or the entire school curriculum integration of Makerspaces. This one, I think I'll take it from the part of Africa where most of the education is more theoretical than practical. So most of our participants were of the view that if there is integration of Makerspaces to bridge that gap between theoretical and practical aspects to equip students with some kind of skills and knowledge even before they graduate from school, it will be very something beneficial, not just to the Makerspace community, but also to the entire community. And creating regulations to protect creators of prototypes or ideas. Makerspaces is now being recognized or is now coming up, and we have already established businesses or established manufacturers that sometimes may want to use the product of Makerspace without actually providing some form of remuneration or some form of compensation for using that idea of the creation. And we believe that having that regulations is a form of supporting them, a form of trying to ensure that they can still keep on creating and bringing new innovation to bear. We also have the economic and infrastructure support, that is initiatives to support Makerspace in accessing infrastructure at a lower cost. For instance, digital infrastructure when it comes to internet accessibility, how expensive is it for Makerspaces? When it comes to, as mentioned earlier, in Europe, there are some Makerspaces that have rent-free structures. If that could also be possible in the form of initiative to provide some public structures which are not in use for Makerspaces to use as their space in their action of exhibiting their duties. Then finally, we have the repair movement and digital initiatives. That is, there should be a policy integration on repair movement and also digital product passports. So this one focuses on identifying ways that Makerspace can still be able to repair. And this should be a form of a regulation, a policy or initiative that can actually support Makerspaces to have that opportunity to do so, rather than always going back to the environment, not to be able to, that could cause environmental challenges or climate change challenges. So basically, those are some of the policies that I've mentioned. Now for the policy evaluation, it is also indicated that in order for us to be able to evaluate those policies that have been mentioned previously, then there is the need for us to be able to measure the environmental impact of the policy. So those policies that have been taken or evaluated, that have been enumerated, how is the impact of those policies to the environment in which it is supposed to operate? Is it making the actual impact that is being made to do so? Or how is the policy also measuring the impact on the environment? How is the policy also impacting the environment in which it is being used? Is it making the society more comfortable? Is it giving the society more impactful in terms of people having access to the Makerspace, able to impact their health, their education, other aspects within which the community lives? So at this note, please, I would like to pause here. If you have any recommendation, any support, anything, any question, you can add up to what we have here.
Thank you so much for sharing these findings, Joseph. So I'd quickly want to add a bit of what we are trying to understand here. We are trying to understand if these policy recommendations are inclusive, like do they apply to Europe and do they apply to Africa? What are the potential side effects that can come as a result of implementing these policies? And what are some approaches we can use to ensure that these policies can be implemented, especially in Africa? And we already have a question in the chat from Kwabena. Kwabena, do you want to unmute and speak?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Kwabena Obriakwa from Social Entrepreneurship Hub in Ghana, and we are also working on what we call the Enoboa project, which is mainly a co-creation space that is supporting creative and people in the fashion area using sustainable materials to create and co-create among themselves. So the question, wonderful presentation. My question was in terms of when he spoke about recognition, that Makerspaces want to be recognized as manufacturing, local manufacturers or as a manufacturing center. And I wanted a clarification to the meaning of manufacturing in this sense.
Yes, Kwabena. So I would throw this question back to all of us. Maybe Guillem, you could start by providing some insights to what we mean by local manufacturing, or at least what it means to Fab Lab Barcelona in the context of the work you do.
Thank you. So just to kind of make sure I'm getting the question properly, you would like me to define how we understand local manufacturing?
So it's more
Right.
to understand it in the
Okay.
context of suggesting a policy and linking it to recognition, because what I was asking myself was what kind of recognition in relation to manufacturing or not being a manufacturer in terms of being a maker space.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to me, the concept that we should frame manufacturing into broader ecosystems, right? And I think Fab City has a very clear vision on that. The key point here is that we went from actually the production of goods very much based into local resources and local knowledge to actually the production of goods based in very complex, let's say, financial and policy consequences, which actually they are not connected anymore with the, let's say, ecosystemic boundaries of the places we live. What I mean with that is that for the last, let's say, 20 years at least, not to say 100, but truly true, it become very common that we might produce something in a part of the world that doesn't produce at all that material just by exporting materials from a specific place. And then we have shipping, let's say, to the other part of the world. And we have basically just use it there for a very short time. Let's keep in mind that a lot of the things that we make at the end of the day in some economies, specifically in Western economies, are used more or less as services even. You use something and then, you know, at the point it doesn't serve to you, you just throw it away without actually even considering the materiality of it. And then, so these may end up, you know, like just basically just going to the landfill. So to me, the capacity of the role that we have it's on changing the current status of manufacturing, promoting practices of manufacturing which are more localized. That doesn't mean that the makerspace is the one who's going to cope with all the production as the production that enables, let's say, the economies or the lifestyle that we are living with. It means the makerspace could become the one that facilitates that transition, more importantly, by ensuring that this knowledge remains there. No, because at the end of the day, what's very important, and that's, for example, it's very interesting when you hear people saying why they do produce in China. It's not anymore the cheap cost of labor, is actually the amount of knowledge that nowadays exists in how to manufacture consumer products in China, specifically in the Shenzhen area, right? So what's very fundamental is that we don't position ourselves as the ones that would do all the manufacturing as this infrastructure for manufacturing, but we position ourselves as a catalyzer of these networks of manufacturers, and more importantly, the creators of this localized knowledge that helps infrastructure, you know, the current society to make that. In that direction, for example, something that we've been working a lot here, it's how we transition from being a reference for academia and universities and becoming more a reference for vocational training, because we see that that's a scale actually that we can impact the most. And that's a scale of how we understand manufacturing a lot. I've kind of been going through many ideas. So please, if you want me to point to something more specific, you know, I'm very happy to kind of dig more into the specificities of the policy topic you say.
I can add a bit to that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Right. So in terms of makerspaces being recognized, I don't think it's about recognition. It's about the makerspaces situating themselves very well to address local issues. Sorry, my name is Adu-Gyamfi. I'm with the Ghana Hubs Network and also the Center for Social Innovations. I have a research in leveraging makerspaces as an enabler to addressing the issues of stagnation, innovation stagnation in the informal sector. And one of the things I found was that for those in the informal sector, for instance, if you come to in Ghana, there are informal sector hubs spread across, and these are organically developed. So, for instance, the Swami magazine is a major informal sector hub for vehicle parts manufacturers, light manufacturing, for metal casting, fabrication, and a whole lot. If you go to other places, there's a lot. There's a concentration of shea butter processors. So that's that value chain becomes like making industry. If you go to the kente industry, the yarn making, the weaving of the iconic kente, for instance, that's innovation and making. However, those hubs are situated. And so if you analyze and engage and to find out whether they know about the maker movement and its impact, they will tell you that it's more academic. What they see of the maker movement and maker spaces is an issue of academic. They think that what we do not address local issues. So when one of the things that I would say to this issue of recognition is to go for natural recognition, which is how do we ensure that maker spaces, for instance, in Ghana, address developmental issues? So, for instance, if you have maker spaces and you move around, you see that you have a lot of food that are being sold and they are put on the ground. How do maker spaces address that issue? There's also the issue of even processing of food. If those who eat KK and those associated foods sold on the streets, you see that there are local mills, local grinding mills that are made and are susceptible to friction. And so a lot of the iron wears out into the ground food that ends up on our table, and then we suffer. There's a lot of research that has been done by researchers at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology to that effect. So this is a clear issue for maker spaces to be able to use 3D printing in sort of improving the grinding mills, and then in certain senses that upon friction would stop the machine and avoid instances where iron gets into the food. But I'm giving a very typical example. If a maker space solve that issue, which is an issue of manufacturing or processing, they will instantly be recognized. So it's not about seeking recognition from an institution before you act. I would say you put the cart before the horse. Here, address the problem, address the developmental problem, and then get the recognition. And I think that's where you get the policymakers to be looking at you. You get private investors to be looking at you, because you test your prototype right there and then. You can say that for those who are making for artisans that are developing machinery and that address some of our pertinent local issues, even in transportation. So I would say that it's an issue of the maker spaces positioning themselves very well, and then being enablers to addressing some of the developmental issues. And that comes with natural recognition. Because at the moment, there's a gap in even policymakers appreciating what we do. And even for those who are private investors or artisans or local entrepreneurs appreciating what we do. So there's a gap. And that gap can be filled when maker spaces start to address very pertinent local issues. That's what I'll add for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, yeah. We would take like 1 or 2 submissions on the policy recommendations and any submissions on its inclusivity, its applicability, and what approaches we can adopt to ensure that maker spaces. Okay, Guillem, over to you.
I just want to add something that I mentioned during my presentation, but the more and more actually we are finding out this, and it's something that in a way might sound very obvious, or the opposite, doesn't sound obvious. But to us, it's also fundamental. We talk to policy to explain that the role of these spaces, when we talk about the production of local solutions, is not the production only of local solutions through the prototype and making of the solutions per se. So what I mean by that is that the roles of Fab Labs is not only to make prototypes of solutions or to make solutions as objects, as artifacts, as machines. It's also how the making process enables the creation of solutions. So in many cases, a makerspace might create a new technology, a new object, a new artifact that's used by a community to gather around an issue. And then the final solution might not be technological. As well, an object could be created to maybe talk about a very broad concept that's very hard to understand, like, for example, climate change or artificial intelligence. Or even sometimes the role of the prototypes that we are building, it's only to facilitate more prototypes to happen. Because at the end, a community that's capable to prototype is a community that's capable to be actively solving their own issues. And so I just want to underline these because sometimes we are seen only as production capacity, and I think it's broader than that.
Thank you for the quick addition, Guillem. We'll take the final one from Kwabena, and then we'll move on to hear from Yao concerning his work so far in the innovation ecosystem. Over to you, Kwabena.
Thank you very much. So I think Yao spoke a lot to the question that I was asking. And one also observation is that as we advance or make recommendations for policy, we should also not try to standardize maker spaces. Because when Yao was talking, he was making mention of some of the artisanal spaces, if I should call it that way, like Swami and all these spaces. Can we, even from our local perspective, categorize them under maker spaces? Because some of the work that they do, they are transforming a lot of materials and contributing a lot to our economy. And even the government of Ghana recognizing such spaces, and even some universities are moving into such spaces to have interactions with them on how best they can also come up with certain innovations. So in as much as we want to make these recommendations look or maybe make it more general, we might also have to look at the specificity in the various countries or regions that we find ourselves. And the last thing I'll add to it is that there was something mentioned about health policy. And from our side, what we have done is that there's, I think fortunately for us in Ghana, we have what we call the National Health Insurance Scheme. So people who work within the makerspace that is under the hub and are required to roll themselves onto this scheme so that if there's anything like injury or any challenge, then they have access to hospital. And it does not cost so much. In cases where they cannot themselves, the hub does it for them. So I think that is one thing that we might also want to also maybe look at from the various countries in terms of health policy-wise. Do we need to think about a policy, or do we take advantage of the existing structures to make it more meaningful and not wait for a policy to be put in place before we institute certain structures which will protect or make it more meaningful for them when they are working with dangerous or material.
Thank you so much for the submission, Pamela. And we'll quickly go back to Yao. Yao, please, the virtual stage is yours. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Freda. I don't have a presentation. I want us to engage in something that would help us to also answer questions about the work that we do, and also try and situate the work that we do, specifically as a global movement, but also acting local. We know that there's a lot of collaboration between Africa and Europe, of course, because of the Horizon, program that Europe is implementing. to, among other things, also address innovation stagnation. But we do also experience innovation stagnation at our end in terms of how do we make emerging open collaborative tools, for instance, more available to our people, whether they're students, whether they're innovators, entrepreneurs, startup founders. How do we ensure that our innovation hubs that also operate makerspaces have the requisite tools and relevant tools to be able to make the needed impact and support the national agenda. In Ghana, we know that there are a couple of things that policy issues that face us all, a couple of development challenges. One key area is in bridging the skills gap. And a second one you can think of is the issue of jobs, especially for the youth. Youth unemployment is such a big issue amongst us. But the other key thing that sometimes we fail to look at is the issue of leveraging local resources. Leveraging local resources. Now, in leveraging local resources, it's about trying to understand that within the area where we are operating from, there are resources that are both material or human that we can leverage to be able to help in building solutions or in the process of building solutions that impact on development. So these three things are key. But more importantly, once hubs or makerspaces in Africa, and more specifically in Ghana, are able to localize whilst operating with global models and standards and everything, but are able to localize in their approach to addressing the challenges or development challenges that we have. Then we are able to build the necessary content and insights with which we can be able to engage our European partners better. Because with these insights and also content, we are able to then highlight issues that are of priority, of local priority, and then also build solutions that are relevant and are aligned to our national and local level development goals. So for instance, SDGs, which by 2030, we are more or less now 7 years to go, it's a huge national priority. Now, if you look at, if you cascade that down and you talk about what we are facing as a country right now, is the issue of jobs. It's the issue of agricultural productivity, enhancing agricultural productivity, building resilience. And so makerspaces, especially operating in Ghana, need to be aware of these policy angles. And so that they are able to align themselves and of course, whilst addressing some of those, helping to address some of those issues, then they gain the recognition and then integration that is needed. Of course, earlier on, there was in the presentation by Mr. Gina, he made mention of makerspaces being also integrating themselves into the industrialization agenda, which is a key policy issue of government. For instance, how do makerspaces support the policy of government, which is around one district, one factory, for instance? We know that there are digital manufacturing solutions. We know that the making environment, there are a lot of collaborative tools and that would make it possible for enhanced manufacturing, for instance, that are far away from what we know of industrialization or an industry or a factory, for instance, as a huge space, that employ a lot of people. But then how do we bring in these new contemporary ideas of making, of industrialization that are also different, different from the models that are being implemented, but that are more efficient in delivering solutions and opening up new opportunities from the challenges that we face as a country. So in agriculture, we know that there's a huge policy around one village, one dam. So for one village, one dam, how do we also align? How are we part of that conversation? How do we get makers in the implementing areas of the one village, one dam to be able to leverage solutions, water tech solutions that are coming from, that have been developed by other makerspaces, for instance, and can be localized here, to make sure that we are also part of that, solution building, so that we help erase, start the process of erasing that notion that makerspaces and the maker movement is more academic. But once we step into these policy intervention areas and are providing or even piloting solutions with the local government, for instance, then that recognition and that that notion of being academic can be erased, and then we can go on to the point of being invited to discussions on policies that ensue from the ones that are being implemented already. Now, my friend Kwabena mentioned about standardization and whether we need to introduce standards. I have an argument here with respect to, when we say standardize, you are also talking about formalization. Now we are talking about the informal sector and then formalization. Formalization needs to be defined because the whole world is going informal. Now, for instance, what we are doing right now is informal. At the normal circumstances, we should be meeting in person and, with the moderator seated and things like that, all of that structured environment that we used to have. That is the formal environment. I mean, in Europe and the West, they have something they call on-conference. That is informalization. So the whole world is going informal and going local, which is, thinking global and acting local. So the issue is not about formalizing the artisanal sector or the industrial hubs. I call the Swam magazine, for instance, an industrial hub. Now, my research has been shared by Freda, so later, participants can look at it and understand some of the issues I'm raising. But the issue is not about formalization. If it's about standards, yes, standards can be integrated even in an informal environment. So, for instance, makers can work with the fabricators and those who make the grinding mills that are so popular in Ghana and West Africa, coming from some magazine. Makers can work with them to address the issue of friction that sort of leads to iron being getting into the food and creating health and safety issues. Now, that is a standard. You're making sure that you reduce friction, you have a sensor in there, and at least you reduce the amount of iron that gets into the food. You are standardizing it. And of course, when they build the sensor, the standard authority will have to look at it and things like that. So that you bring some standardization, but you are not formalizing per se the work of the informal sector, because they thrive on that informalization. How do they thrive on that informalization? They thrive on that informalization because it's an open, collaborative environment. A colleague has an idea, they go to the next shop, and they sit down, they have a discussion around it. Another one, he goes to a latener comes up with a cutting or a prototype, and then they have a discussion around it, collaborate. And then the next point is they are talking with the customer as to how to commercialize it or how to, get to the final product. That process has a lot of informal engagements within the Swam magazine at different shops. Now, there's the same thing we do for us as scholars, as researchers, as innovators, because sometimes you are doing a research, but you are collaborating with somebody in Europe or in South Africa or elsewhere, and you are using Google tools, you are developing models, and in using all of those open collaborative models.
So actually, in the informal sector is just the informalization of the world where it is going. We are actually going the way of the informal sector. And so we need to, as we begin to engage with the informal sector, or others who are engaging with the informal sector already, there's a need to appreciate that point and be able to appreciate where the informal makers are coming from, and then we meet them halfway and are able to work with them. I'll give you a typical example. In the 1970s, and this is highlighted in my research, the intermediary technology transfer unit at the Swan magazine was formed. I mean, for many of us who have not been to Swan magazine before, when you go there, you think that it's a shanty town, or it's you know, it's a, what do you call it, a discarded area, a place for discarded items. But the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology Engineering College set up the intermediary technology transfer unit at the Swan magazine, ostensibly to transfer knowledge from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, knowledge and then expertise to work with makers over there who are fabricating all sorts of things. And so when they started doing that, they were able to introduce new machines like the CNC machines, the latheners, and all of the grinding machines that were introduced into the Swan magazine. So sort of fast-tracked the process of making in the Swan magazine. Now then you have professors who then came down and worked with the artisans on projects. And some of these projects were not just academic projects; they were projects that the artisans themselves were working on. So, for instance, when they came up with the triple loom for weaving in the kente industry, artisans at Swan magazine and professors at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, it was to address an issue of women not being able to weave because of the notion that if they weave on single looms, they will lose their fertility. They will be infertile. And so to address that, they brought the technology of the triple loom system. And some of that triple loom is still in the system. And so the sort of it addressed that taboo and fast-tracked the process of bringing in women who would also come up with ideas, new ideas. You know, women are good with colors and things like that. So it made, brought ideas that made the kente more colorful, more appreciative, introduced new yarns and new methods of weaving. Now, this is what I'm talking about. That collaborative environment coming together and also supported by policy, because in the 80s, when we had a challenge of forex, and we couldn't import, especially boats and nuts for our trucks to be able to convey cocoa to be exported. It was the Swan magazine artisans with their professors from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology that made the boats and nuts locally. Now you have, of course, even in Ghana now you have companies and factories that are fabricating boats, nuts, and also leaf springs and things like that. But it started in the 80s when there was a challenge, and policy and government policy set the stage for bringing these together, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology and the informal sector of Swan magazine together. Now, let me end on what the challenge now is in Ghana, and how the maker movement and the maker spaces could be able to help, merge or help address, and then have insights that we can be able to engage effectively with our European partners to share. Now, was an opportunity and a challenge. Now, the challenge is creating jobs. Where do we create jobs? How do we create jobs? And another one is taking advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and building capacity and helping local manufacturers to be able to improve on what they are already doing for exports. And of course, that's where the Cabinet standardization comes in, because then you want to export, you want to be able to address certain standards. And so how do Makerspace come in? I'll take the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement first. Now, for after the agreement, now over 30 countries that have ratified, the idea is to create the biggest markets across and ensure that over time, about 90% of the tariffs will be wiped off to enable local traders in Ghana, for instance, trade with their counterparts in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Togo, and other places. Of course, this is not to say that they are already not trading. They are trading because you have people who come to some magazine, for instance, to pick up wares and send them back. But they are trading, but the policy is to ensure that it becomes more effective and more impactful, because they are trading under different tariff regimes. That makes it very difficult for traders across to make enough profit. And so you pay tariff in Ghana, you pay another tariff in Togo or in Burkina and the rest, and that needs to be addressed. And that's what the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement seeks to do, which is to harmonize the tariff system and increasingly make it over the next 10 years, make it possible for about 90% of them to be wiped out. Now, we need makers in the manufacturing space. Mr. Gina, I agree with you. This is where we need makers in the manufacturing space, where they are adding value to our local products, our kente, our shea butter, our asana, all of the things that food that gives us comparative and competitive advantage. We need to be able to add value to it. Why? And not concentrate on very fanciful things. But those areas have some of the largest number of people engaged in it. For instance, there are a lot of people who read, there are a lot of people who farm, there are a lot of people who are in the shea butter industry, there are a lot of people who are into other areas, within the value chain of agriculture. So we need makers to position themselves very well, to add value to the things that gives us competitive and comparative advantage, so that we can be able to trade more effectively within the African Continental Free Trade Area, a free trade area. Now, the issue of jobs. Now, makerspaces, there are a lot of makerspaces within the Ghana Hubs network, for instance, serve as conduits for skills building. So how then do you get a lot more of our makerspaces building the necessary skill sets? Building the necessary skill sets that are able to engender new opportunities and create new sectors that will give jobs to the people who are involved in it. So that's something that should engulf our mind. How do we create opportunities through makerspaces, through building the skills, and then leveraging the skills to be able to develop solutions and ideas that address some of our biggest challenges, for instance. So that's another angle. Now, the last one before I wrap up is the issue of building resilience in agriculture, and also ensuring that sector becomes a game changer in terms of access to economic opportunities and jobs and things like that. We know that makerspaces do not necessarily end up in commercialized prototypes, but this is where I want makerspaces in Ghana to redirect their efforts. Of course, there are makerspaces that can contribute to research commercialization and prototype, and there are also makerspaces that can develop prototype that can be leveraged within the agricultural sector, within the value chain. We need to be able to identify opportunities within the value chain that makerspaces and the maker movement can be able to build the appropriate technology that addresses the challenges we have in the makerspaces. Within the agricultural value chain. You know, in where we create new opportunities, and then also build capacity, address losses in the sector, and then in the long run gain the needed recognition and integration. So I would end here. I wanted to add there's the issue of, for instance, Ghana's emerging auto industry, for instance, is an emerging area for high-end maker spaces, makers and manufacturing spaces to be able to align, and then for the thousands of items that are needed within the value chain of the auto industry in Ghana, for instance, they can be able to fix themselves and be making for the industry and making the relevant impact. But I will end here and take any questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yao, for your extensive talk and sharing all the experiences you have, especially in Swami and the local innovation ecosystem. We can take one question because time is far spent. So please, if you have any questions or submissions or thoughts to add to Yao's talk, please feel free to unmute and then share. Okay, so in the absence of any questions or submissions, I'd like to thank you for your time today and for joining us today. Would like to facilitate more connections amongst ourselves, so please feel free to reach out to Freda at fab.city for any requests, either for the recordings or presentations, or to be connected to another participant or stakeholder who joined the community call today. On this note, I'd like to thank us so much for our time today and for contributing to our discussion today. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.